really pleased to welcome you to the 2023 Elson Lecture. Today's conversation will feature Christina Fernandez, a Los Angeles-born and based photographer who for more than 30 years has created quiet but very powerful photographs that engage topics of labor, gender, migration, and her Mexican-American and Chicana identity, forged in the Southern California borderlands. Regarding the impact of her life in that area, Christina has said, and I quote here, "My parents are Chicano activists and basically raised me on the picket line. It trained my eye to see injustice. I grew up with empathy for others and an awareness of where I come from." Christina Fernandez earned her BA at UCLA in 1989 and her MFA at the California Institute of Arts in 1996. She has been a longtime professor of photography at Cerritos College in Norwalk, California. And her works have been featured in many significant exhibitions, including Home, So Different, So Appealing, Phantom Sightings, Art After the Chicano Movement, both presented at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, in addition to Flight Patterns at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles, and Insight 97 in San Diego and Tijuana, among many others. Her work is in numerous museum permanent collections around the country, including the Smithsonian American Art Museum here in Washington, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and very proudly, the National Gallery of Art. Just as important, in 2021, Fernandez was one of the first artists honored with the prestigious Latinx Artist Fellowship, an initiative of the US Latinx Art Forum. And just last year, the California Museum of Photography premiered the landmark exhibition, Christina Fernandez, Multiple Exposures, which is her first mid-career retrospective. Excuse me. I have only recently just met Christina, but I have admired her work for many years, and I'm honored that it is here at the National Gallery, and I'm honored to be in conversation with her once again. So thank you, Christina. Congratulations on this major mid-career retrospective. It's so exciting that you're having it, and I'm so pleased that it is going to 5 venues. That's really impressive. 5 venues around the country.
Yes, I think, let's see, Princeton Museum of Art is missing from the itinerary up there, but that's all right. It's at the Amon Carter right now, so if any of you happen to go to Fort Worth, please do go see it. It's a lovely, lovely installation of the work. And then, yeah, it's coming home to California, San Jose Museum of Art, and then back out to the Midwest to Chicago. Yeah. Very exciting.
Fabulous. It's really great. I was fortunate to see at least a portion of it at Riverside earlier this year. Yeah. There was also an installation at Pomona, which it sounds like will be shown in some of the installations, but not all of them.
Right, correct, yeah. I think San Jose is going to take it on. I think Princeton is looking for another space for that part of the exhibition. Yeah.
Great. Great. In my opening remarks, I quoted you on how your upbringing in Southern California within the context of Chicano activism shaped the way you looked at the world. So let's start with a very fundamental question.
Sure.
Where and how did you become a photographer?
Oh, it's kind of a long story. I mean, we only have an hour, but my father was like a hobbyist photographer. So we would be on the picket line or, marching somewhere with the United Farm Workers. And he would always bring his camera along, not only to document the protest march or whatever it might be, his family as well, but also to turn the camera around on the FBI agents that also were photographing everything. So we have several photographs of that in his archive that I'm currently actually going through right now because he passed about 2 years ago. So he was an influence. I think I had always been an artist. I think I declared I was going to be an artist like when I was 5 or 6 years old, something like that. So I ended up at UCLA as an undergrad, and I tried to petition out of photography because I just didn't think I would like it. Young people, they know exactly what they want to do in life. But anyways, so I spoke to the counselor, and he's like, no, you have to take photography. You're an artist, a contemporary artist now. You got to take it. So I went ahead and I took it, and I got really, really super lucky with Joyce Neimanis as a visiting professor. I think Robert Heineken, her husband, was out on sabbatical, and she came in as a replacement, basically. And she is an incredible artist and educator. And she saw my photographs, and she was like, well, you've got to do this. Your work is good. So I was encouraged by that, yeah. And then subsequently went to CalArts to study, basically, with Alan Sekula, who I greatly admired.
So you had a very conceptual education in photography, studying with some of the most major influential figures post World War II, certainly
Yes,
in
yes.
California.
Yeah. Alan especially. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So the farm workers installation, that comes from a time before you were really a full-time photographer. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually, this started in my undergrad years at UCLA. I was taking a class with Chris Burden. I believe it was called New Genres, something like that. And it was basically a performance / installation / whatever you wanted to do class. And at the time, Cesar Chavez was on a hunger strike to protest the use of dangerous pesticides, and which were actually killing farm workers in the fields and also in utero. So I decided I wanted to sort of recognize his hunger strike and do an artwork about it. My parents had been UFW organizers, so they would receive these newsletters, and in these newsletters there were sort of a list of deaths by pesticide. Also, injuries, farm worker injuries, and things of that nature. So I typed up all this information. There was something like 82 cards, something like that, and put this information on index cards. Brought a bunch of dirt up to the white room that we did all our work in my vintage Mercedes. It was such a feat. But anyways, planted the cards in the dirt. I made this big dirt rectangle with rows in it and planted the cards in the dirt as a sort of performance piece, which turned into an installation piece. And it was up for about a day. When I went to CalArts, I'm like, I want to re-envision the work because it was only up for a day. It was a lot of research. I wanted people to know about this, these tragedies, these farm worker lives. And so I re-envisioned the piece as a sort of landscape in miniature, where I had my brother plant the cards into soil and I would photograph. And these became 5x7-inch photographs that I kind of used as a grid, basically. I exhibited them in a grid.
What we're seeing back there, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, whereas Chris Burden and the class received the work very, very well. Not so much at CalArts. CalArts was a lot tougher. It was my first grad crit. They questioned where I got the information. They wanted more documentation. They kind of tore the piece apart based on that. And it was very difficult for me emotionally because I was so emotionally tied to the information because it's my family's work. So I just put it away and subsequently brought out the photographs every once in a while for like a Day of the Dead exhibition. And then when the Benton offered 2 gallery spaces to me, I decided I wanted to bring it back out again. And so the piece in the back with the sort of hands planting the cards is the original cards from my class with Chris Burton. And the dirt installation is actually new farm worker deaths from heat stroke. So pesticide has become less of an issue. It's still an issue, but heat stroke has become a very big issue with farm workers, especially with global warming. They're out there working endless hours in 105-degree weather or hotter. The age range of farm workers is anywhere from the teens, the mid-teens, to like 64, 65 years old, people that should be retiring. So, there's this big age range and a lot of vulnerability with the younger and the older as well. So those are all new deaths from heat stroke. And yeah, this is a really emotional and difficult piece. So all the names that I gathered were all from media. Some were from the CDC. The ones that I gathered from the CDC are unknown or marked as unknown. But the ones that I gathered from media are all named. So you could actually look any of these up on your phone, these people up on your phone, and you would get at least one article about their passing. So this is a way that I kind of mitigated my, there's a potential for exploitation here. It's a very tight rope to walk. But given that their families talked to the media about their deaths, I figured that I could name them in this manner. So yeah, that's the installation at the Benton Museum.
It brings up a very interesting aspect of your work that I think many people, many photographers in particular, if they were interested in focusing on this subject, might have depicted the actual workers who were suffering from it. And in your work, you've been very careful about sort of when and where and how you portray the figure, which I think is very important. So often photographers and the media culture in general, presents very abject representations of Latinx people as well as other people of color. And your photographs and outlook really undermine that approach. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I think those types of photographs are needed. I think that, documentary photographers or photojournalists definitely need to do that work. There's a lot of people that do that work. What I'm doing is sort of presenting the information in a different way. I'm sort of questioning what the visual image of a person suffering does, right? Mm-hmm. Although I do believe the work is needed, this is not the kind of work that I do simply because I do question that. I even question, the information that, like, is it okay to present this information? So I go back and forth about those ideas of exploitation, even in my own work, yeah.
Interesting. Let's move ahead to this great series of pictures, multiple exposures. You created this after a trip to Mexico, and you've spoken about the series addressing your discomfort with how Indigenous people were treated in Mexico and your complex feelings about visiting Mexico as a politicized Mexican American or Chicana. And in the series, you re-photograph iconic images by prominent Mexican photographers like Manuel Alvarez Bravo, overlaying part of the image with your own portrait. One of these, as many of you may remember, was included in our recent exhibition, The Double, which looked at the use of doubling in contemporary art. What attracted you to the Bravo image, and why did you transform it as you did?
Well, I'm sort of utilizing, renowned Mexican photographers' work like Bravo or Nacho Lopez or Gabriel Figueroa, who's actually a cinematographer, Tina Madodi, sort of positing like their work is how we know Indigenous women and how also Indigenous women become, in a way, the face of Mexico, right? A representation of Mexican life. So when I had gone to Oaxaca, going back to homeland or whatever you want to call it is a problematic notion for sure, especially for a fourth generation person like I am. So you may go with a bit of naivete, but what I encountered was a sort of, basically a racism that I had not expected. Like I had American notions of racism, but I didn't know about like sort of how could I explain it? Sort of like a caste system of racism, right? And so that kind of shocked me. That shocked me. Call it naive, but it did. I was there basically to photograph the Zapotec ruins, which I was really interested in because mostly of the work of Ana Mendieta, but also just the historical aspect of the Zapotec ruins. Anna did work at Yugul, a lot of work at Yugul, and hopefully you're familiar with that work. So I went to photograph the ruins, and I photographed them, and those photographs came out pretty nice. But they're like travel photographs, really, So I'm like, this is not quite what I was looking for. And then I had this experience, and I came back home, and I'm like, I want to talk about that experience that I had. Looking at this kind of racism within Mexico from an outsider's perspective, me being Chicana, fourth generation, I need to talk about this somehow, and I didn't really know how to do it. So I reverted to, what I kind of do a lot, which is the layering of an image, sort of creating a space within a two-dimensional space, a deeper space within the two-dimensional space by layering, right? And so I got my film camera, my 35 millimeter film camera, and turned it portrait, right? And I put a little magnifying filter onto the camera and zoomed into these images of Indigenous women in these photographic books. So in the actual image, you can see the halftone marks of the publication. So it sort of announces to you, this is work that is copied from a publication, right? And this is how I'm interacting with these women, is through their image by a famous Mexican photographer that is published in this book. So there's all this separation, but through the double exposure, which I layer my image on top of their image, there's a closeness, right? But there's still a separation. So I was building this sort of complex space within the photograph to kind of emulate my complex relationship, right, to going back to Mexico and, my Indigenous roots. So that's what this series is about. This particular image is Girl Watching Birds. And so what I tried to do with each image is sort of embrace the person or interact with them in some way. In this particular image, I'm sort of copying her gesture. And, it can get very muddy in terms of whose facial feature is who's overlapping who. So that push and pull is something I also found very interesting, right? It's the nature of silver gelatin too, right? The nature of how bright or highlights are densities on film and darker areas are transparencies on film. So it's the reverse, yeah.
I was thinking as you were saying this, just a sort of technical aside, that younger people will have little understanding of how technically difficult this is to do with film as opposed to a digital camera, and the muddy must have referred not only to perhaps muddying whose gesture is whose, but also a literal muddying of the film and of the image.
So, like in the contact sheets, you'll notice some where I forgot where the top of the camera was. So so it's like upside down. But yeah, I shot a lot of film. I did. And what's really great is that I did this work when I was a teacher at Pomona College, which is the Benton Museum.
Right, exactly.
So it's kind of, that exhibition there was a really nice full circle for me.
It's also interesting too, because you're only taking portions of pictures by well-known photographers, but also not necessarily always their most well-known pictures. So you're challenging all of our collective understanding
of their work,
as well, which is, I think, another very interesting facet of this series.
Yeah, I was looking at their images completely with the eye or the goal of, will this make a good portrait, and how do I interact with this figure?
Right.
With Tina Madodi's work, I didn't do that till the very last, like even a year after I'd completed all the other photographs, because I really just couldn't figure out her work. I couldn't figure out, she photographed women in such a sculptural way that it was very hard to sort of interject into that. And I finally figured it out with an image that I found.
It's a great series. That then brings us to the really extraordinary series, Maria's Great Expedition, 1995 to 1996, with which the Smithsonian American Art Museum owns. It's a piece that Carmen actually bought for them. The Museum of Modern Art also has a copy of it. It combines self-portraiture, family history, Latinx stories that are almost always left out of our understanding of the American West. It's really an amazingly rich series. The project tells the story of your great-great-grandmother's...
No, just great.
Just great. Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
Great-grandmother's migration from Mexico to the United States in the early 20th century. And you assume her role. This is the installation at the Museum of Modern Art of the whole series. You can see the photographs hanging on the wall, and then there's a ledge down below here, which presents a bilingual narrative of her life and Mexican-American history that helps to illuminate it. It begins with, oops, we went too far. Oops, sorry.
That's okay.
It seems to be sensitive there. It begins with a map that traces Maria's journey in a very bold line, her movement from Mexico through the Southwest. And then there's a series of photographs such as these two here. The one on the left is a detail from her leaving Mexico, and the one on the right is when she is in Los Angeles, in Boyle Heights, in the Aliso Village there. What were you aiming to do with this project?
Well, it was sort of a genesis from a request, actually. So Chan Noriega had been asked by the Mexican Museum in San Francisco to curate an exhibition of Chicano narrative photography about the Southwest. And recently in a conversation with him, he said he found 5 photographers, not necessarily who were doing narrative work. And, so anyways, I told him about the story of my great-grandmother and, sort of sight unseen. He said, yes, let's do this, Initially, I had thought, well, I'll use some of her existing photographs and then do sort of a diaristic take on it. And then found out through my grandfather that there were barely any photographs. There were 2 photographs, and those 2 photographs were taken later in her life. And so I thought, well, okay, now what do I do? I can work with these 2 photographs, I guess. But I thought, well, my middle name is Maria. I had been told that I look like her, so I thought, I'll just reenact her life. Right? I'd been looking at Carrie Mae Weems' work, of course, looking at Cindy Sherman's work. So I used that sort of strategy, but to reenact a story that was closer to me and, about my family. I went about doing interviews with my grandmother, she was very close to, my grandfather, some of her other children, and pulled together a narrative of her life. I did a lot of historical research, kind of situating or contextualizing her life in a social sort of, political framework, and then produced the photographs. So the photographs came from the text, right? And so I did a lot of thrift store shopping, a lot of research about, how people dressed in that certain era, what photographs look like during those certain times. I did a lot of sewing myself. I had been a fashion design student before I became an art student, so that. And began to make pictures in which I stand in for her. I was quick to acknowledge that there was no way I was going to be able to perfectly reenact, like you see in the movies, right? Where everything flows and there's nothing out of line. And I quickly realized with my $1,500 honorarium that was not going to happen. So I thought, well, her story is a lot of people's story and a lot of people's story now, right? So I incorporated anachronisms very carefully into the photographs that sort of acknowledge that this is a reenactment, this is being done now, this could be about you, right? So yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I think you mentioned Carrie Mae Weems, and this series does make me think of Carrie Mae Weems's, kitchen table series, which some of you may remember. We have that's set here, and then we exhibited it shortly before the pandemic. It's a suite of maybe 30 photographs of Weems herself posed around a kitchen table with text. In the sort of a similar way as your series, but her texts are usually sort of very short statements, which one could imagine perhaps Weems or the character Weems is playing, saying. Your texts are quite different, and I have one that I want to read. It's fairly long, but I think it gives you a really good sense of how you're working using image and text in this series, which you really can't see in the slides. This is from the one from 1945 from the Aliso Village, Boyle Heights, California. And the text reads, "During World War II, Frank, who was one of Maria's sons, that's my interjection, sorry.
Yeah.
Fought in Germany, and Charlie, another son, was a sailor stationed in San Diego. Guadalupe, or John, another son.
My grandfather.
Your grandfather, as he was now called, and his wife Dolores, and their children Anita, John Jr., and Robert moved to Boyle Heights in 1942. Maria traveled back and forth to Los Angeles and San Diego to visit her sons. The 1942 internment of Japanese Americans and military conscription created a labor shortage that brought women and people of color into the defense industry workforce. The Braceros program, an agreement between the U.S. and the Mexican governments, brought 100,000 Mexican laborers to California. John worked as a ship welder in San Pedro, and his family lived in war effort housing, which became a low-income projects after the war. Dolores and Maria spent a lot of time together. They would talk over coffee in the morning about their lives. John was studying law at night and working with the LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens, to desegregate Santa Ana public schools. The hostility of the repatriation movement lingered. Repatriation, sparked by the Great Depression, sent hundreds and thousands of Mexican and Mexican-American citizens back to Mexico. John found that Anita and other Chicano children were physically punished in the classroom for speaking Spanish and were not allowed to swim in public pools except on designated days. You have packed so much history, so many different stories into that one text.
Yeah, it's pretty loaded.
It's extraordinarily loaded and significantly different from Carrie Mae Weems's Kitchen Table series.
True. Yeah, I mean, I did a lot of research. I read countless numbers of books about women in the Southwest for the earlier panels, and Rudy Acuña's books. Forgetting the name of the other one, but yeah, I mean, this period of history in particular is very vivid to both my mother and my father at the time as well, because they were children, and both grew up in Boyle Heights. And I think a lot of that history is not that well known, especially the internment history, even at that time, was really not that well known. And my mother and my father grew up with mostly Okinawan Japanese people. In Boyle Heights, it was quite a mixture of people from Russian, Moroccan, Jewish, African American, Japanese. I mean, there was just a lot of different people in that community, and then later it became a more Latinx community. So that point in history was very, very vivid to them. And I also don't think, I mean, like Ken Gonzalez-Day brings up the lynching of Mexicans and Chinese in California. There is this really weird buried history, but I think that a lot of people don't know that, Mexican kids couldn't swim in the public pools, and they couldn't speak Spanish. They got rapped on the knuckles with a ruler if they did. So, a lot of people will ask me, why don't you speak Spanish? I'm like, well, my parents never taught me, because there was an element of trauma. Yeah. definitely.
So you're really bringing to light this history that so many Americans really have not focused on. It's really extraordinary. Well, I want to keep moving, being mindful of time. One of your other great series from this time, 1996 to 2000, is the series Manuela Stitch, which deals with urban labor that's hidden in plain sight. And you do this again by combining image and text. Can you tell us a little bit more about this series and what you hope to do here with the text, perhaps in a different way than from Maria's great expedition?
So I was living in Boyle House, and all around, I had studio in Northeast LA. So that whole area is, sort of a garment factory area where a lot of clothing manufacturing is going on. And initially what I found really interesting is that, all kinds of buildings were being used for the manufacture of our clothing. So it could be something that looked more like an apartment dwelling or a home, even a liquor store, corner liquor store. And the other thing that I found interesting was that the work life of the people inside was in every way concealed from the person that was on the street. Gated, doors, windows that were covered over with patterns. And, I was sort of beginning my love affair with the 4x5 view camera. So this is a camera that you have to, look through with a dark cloth over you. The image is turned upside down. The focusing is done through an accordion fold, like bellows type thing. And the lens and the back are independent. So you can correct perspective, which was very important for this series. But you can also, like for the Lavanderia series, shift out your reflection. And so I started photographing these garment factories, and, I wanted to do it sort of like during June gloom so that I could get all the detail. So I tried for that, early morning photographs. I had to research, when the cars couldn't park in front of these buildings so that I could photograph the buildings without a bunch of cars in front of them. So it was a lot of prep work. And then I would take my camera out early in the morning and photograph. And, I was also, very into at this time the New Topographics group and Louis Baltz in particular. Ironically, later on in my career, I became represented by his gallery. She saw something. She saw something there. But I just, again, we're photographing the buildings, not the people who are working inside. I interviewed 3 women who had worked in the garment industry at different times, all as sewing machine operators of some sort. And one of them had told me about an immigration raid that they had experienced. I would listen to the interviews in my car while I'm driving, and just sort of absorb the story, by listening to it over and over and over again. And when it came time to develop the text, I didn't want to just relay something I had been told verbatim. I just didn't feel like it would be too long of a text, first of all, but I wanted to encapsulate the feeling of fear and paranoia, right? I wanted to find a way to express that. So I made up this story. Originally, the text was pasted on the floor. So it started out in a small, what is that shape? Help me, you guys.
A spiral?
Spiral, like a spool of thread. Like in a garment factory, you would use a cone of thread. Mm-hmm. And so it started out like that, very small, the beginning of the story, and then it would spiral out, getting bigger and bigger, and then go around the gallery and out the door. Mm-hmm. But when Connie Butler included it in flight patterns, I'm not a traveler, and I didn't want to install this text over and over and over again. So we thought 5 Patterns was going to travel. It didn't. It was way before its time, that show. But amazing curator, Connie Butler. So what I did was, was that me? Sorry. What I did was I got a piece of muslin. Muslin is a cloth that is used by the fashion industry to drape a garment, and then you mark it out, and then you make it into a pattern. So I had this idea of using the muslin like as a stretched canvas, and the story is stitched in black embroidery thread. So I felt that kind of, in terms of form and function, worked as well as the pasted text on the floor, right? It worked in a different way, but it was also more travelable. And so I decided to keep it that way. So that's what you're seeing on the left-hand side of the screen.
That does nicely sort of bring us to Lavanderia. And for those of you who might not have noticed, when you exit the auditorium, please go look in the little lobby area there. We've hung 3 of the 6 photographs that we have. It's a great series. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure, of course. So Lavanderia is probably my best known series. Again, continuing the love affair with the 4x5 view camera, but doing these photographs at night and using the camera to shift out what might be my glare of me taking the photograph, and framing things very sort of with a very traditional kind of rule of thirds approach. And the 4x5 view camera is great for that because you have that grid on the ground glass, and you're making everything nice and pretty and straight. So I was photographing storefronts in East LA on Cesar Chavez Boulevard. I was really fascinated by the nightlife of Cesar Chavez Boulevard. Neon signs, people getting off the bus, on the bus, people getting something to eat or shopping with their families, just like kind of a street life that you don't see in LA much at that time. Now there's a lot more street activity in LA. So I was photographing storefronts, and then I came upon a laundromat with this drippy tags, with these drippy tags. And found out that the taggers were using etching liquid that was like from a paint can with a brush to tag. And the reason they did that was because this etching liquid etched onto the glass permanently. So if you want to get rid of the tag, you'd have to replace the whole bank of windows. And that's not going to happen. So they stayed there for a long time. And I could go back and rephotograph. Initially, with that laundromat, I photographed from an oblique angle. I photographed from across the street. I photographed with more sidewalk. I had just come back from seeing Hopper's work, and I just had this strong, this strong visual of the sort of oblique angles that he used, but none of those worked for these photographs. So I went fully frontal, and that worked. So I was able to go back a few times to photograph these laundromats because the graffiti didn't change. The only thing that changed were the people in them, but there was always people in them. So I did the first one, which is in the upper left-hand corner, Lavanderia #1. When I printed it, I realized there's an upside-down flag in the photograph. I had not seen that. And I've often wondered, was that a mistake? Like somebody's putting a flag, but they forgot which way it was up? Or was that a sign of protest? I don't know. The graffiti in a sense is a sign of protest. So it was, the light that hit through the etched graffiti is gorgeous. But at the same time, the drips remind me of blood drips. So it's like violent too, and yet beautiful. And so I went looking for these laundromats with these, these tags. And then I did a lot of laundromats that didn't have any tags. just for a variety of approach. Not every laundromat in East LA is tagged. On the east side, actually. So not just East LA. I went all across sort of Los Angeles County, east side. Are these the 6 that the NGA has?
Yes,
Oh.
yes. And just moving. Sorry. There's the one you were talking about. But moving along to the other amazing piece that we relatively recently acquired. This one, thanks to the National Gallery's Collectors Committee. This is another piece about migration that's quite different in its approach from Maria's great expedition. But once again, you are sort of featured here in the center of this picture. Can you walk us through this work?
Well, this is I feel in a way more complex than Maria's Great Expedition, which is very sort of chronological and sort of like a natural history style of display. This is, I don't know what. This is like, this comes out of the clear blue sky. So originally, this piece existed as just, small 11 by 14, 16 by 20 photographs that were hung in a row. But then this incredible thing happened. We get to print really large mural-sized photographs. And I thought, I really want to do that with this piece. So what this is a large mural photograph of a Zapotec ruin. And then on top of it are mounted smaller photographs that are mounted on aluminum, but directly to the mural. And then there's text on either side. So on one of my trips to Oaxaca, my grandmother was dying, and she was in the hospital when I left. She was hooked up to a respirator. She was hanging on. Everybody told me, go on your trip. She'll be here when you get back. And no, that was a lie. She died while I was there. And I got the news the morning I was going to go photograph Monte Alban, which is the major Zapotec ruin there. So I'm photographing knowing that I'm going to be leaving and knowing that my grandmother has passed. And I enter the museum and I'm looking down into this cubicle that's buried into the floor of a tomb that's been reconstructed. And the information on the tomb says, this is a woman advanced in age, right? And it's her skeletal remains with her pottery surrounding her. And there was no armature to hold up her skeleton, so it was all collapsed, including her rib cage. So she was like out of breath, just like my grandmother had run out of breath. And I sort of collapsed these two images in my head of this woman and my grandmother, and how motherhood and death is persistent, and so that's what the text is about. And you can't really read it on this projection. And then the center image is, I would call it probably a performance for camera, a very brief performance for camera in which I've painted a very rudimentary skeleton on my back, and I'm reaching back and sort of scratching at it. Because this whole idea of going somewhere to recoup your identity or to build an identity is incredibly problematic. And so that's why I'm messing up the skeleton, It's like, no, this is not perfect. This doesn't always work. This didn't work like I thought it was going to work. I'm here looking at this woman's skeletal remains in Mexico, whereas my grandmother just died in Orange County. And that displacement was pretty strong in my head at that time.
I have 1,000 questions I want to ask you about that, but we are running out of time, and I want to get to the sort of last two slides that we have from more recent work. This is suburban nightscapes, and before we open the floor up to questions, these are two of those photographs from suburban nightscapes, and you've said how this work was informed by your own life in suburbia, being a mother. Can you speak a little bit more about that in these pictures?
I mean, for the last 17 years, I have been a mother in suburbia, a mother of a really fun, incredible, free-spirited, intelligent young man now. He's going to be 18 in October. And he is not fully cooked, but he's ready to, you know. And I've always found his life interesting, and the life of his friends and their camaraderie. Boys are different. They have such a sense of just being them that I just never experienced when I was that age, right? The confidence, you know, and I just want to just document that and pay homage to it, you know. So that's what I'm doing with the series. Sometimes I work very close to home, and this is definitely a series like Sereno that acknowledges my life as a mother.
There must also, though, be in there that element of your son, a young man of color, out on the streets at night, and that sense of danger as well.
No, not really. Actually, he's grown up very middle class in a lot of ways, and his friends are of all different colors. I mean, we live in a place called Cerritos in California. I don't know how many people are familiar with it, but it's literally like, we've got East Indian, we've got Black, we've got White, we've got Salvadorian, we've got Korean, we've got Chinese. I mean, it's just an incredible, diverse community, and we're very lucky to live there. But everybody's also pretty middle class. They have these sort of comforts that maybe their parents didn't have, but worked very hard to have. And so, you know, these kids, they know they have it good. And I love that. Yeah. I love that joy, you know, I love that, like, yes, we have a good life. That's and right. They appreciate it, but they're embracing it.
Yeah. So one last picture, this American trailer. Tell us just a bit about this, and then we'll open it up for your questions.
Sure. I'll be kind of brief. So my son used to like to do dirt biking, and I would take him to a dirt bike track in Riverside, which is about an hour and a half from where we live. And that's basically the closest place to ride a dirt bike. And one day I finished, you know, putting the bike on the trailer, and we're driving out, and I encountered the salvage yard, and it's like golden hour, and the light is passing through the window of this beautiful vintage trailer. And I'm like, I gotta photograph that. So I didn't have my camera with me, so I came back and photographed. I photographed 2 times. First time doing the photograph as a whole, and then second time kind of gridding it out with the mind of putting it together, compositing it, and printing it bigger. And then the third time I needed to finish up the tail end, and it had been completely destroyed, completely burned. So what had happened is somebody started living there. And in order to keep warm, they lit a fire, and the trailer got burned down. So I had this weird set of photographs where I had the beautiful, pristine trailer, and then I had the gridded photographs that I did of the front half of the trailer, and then I had this. Well, they had cordoned it all off because, of course, it was a danger now. So I had to kind of poke my camera through the chain link fence and also just hang it in order to get the photograph of all the different levels of the trailer. And then I put it together. I think this is like 30-something photographs. Yeah, composited together. But, I don't know how much of this is happening in DC, but in LA, people are mitigating homelessness by living in trailers. And this was just at the beginning of that. Yeah. So you'll go down, if you visit LA, you go down any street in LA that's more on the industrial side, and you will see trailer upon trailer upon trailer of people living in these trailers to just stay off the street and try to keep warm instead of living in a tent. So yeah, I call it American trailer.
Well, that's sort of a sad end, but we are just about running out of time. I want to see if any of you have any questions for Christina. Yes.
Yeah, amazing work.
Oh, thank you.
And really interesting conversation, so thank you both for that. You mentioned a couple of times in your presentation that it's problematic to search for identity based on places from your family's past and how that's impacted your work. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think, when you're young, and, like I mentioned, I'm fourth generation, so our family hasn't lived in Mexico for quite a while. And so, and then we're constantly informed by new Mexicans, right? New Mexicans who are coming to California, and they're much more tied to their ancestry and their culture, right, than, say, a fourth generation person is. So there's always this sort of butting up, and like trying to understand each other and trying to understand that. And so going back to Mexico, I think, I was trying to sort of capture some of that. But it's problematic because my life is here and my family's here and a lot of our story is here in the US. So, it's referred to as Nepantla, Gloria Anzaldúa, if any of you know her work, yeah. Sort of being on the borderland.
Other questions? Yes, Jeanette.
When you're working with your students, does identity come up or identity politics? Do you fish that out for them in their work when they're working with photography, or is that something they're thinking about independently?
When they see my work and work that I show them by other photographers, then they start to branch out and talk about it and discuss it. Before that, it's usually suppressed. It's usually not something that's an issue for them. But once I make it okay for them to talk about these things and to address, create work that talks about these things, they embrace it. But it's just like just scratching that surface. It's just like getting them to just trust me as an academic, I do this Day of the Dead project in which they post somebody that has a picture of somebody that has passed, and they talk about their family member or their friend, and a lot comes out in those because they're done on Canvas, they're done on a discussion board, and they feel a lot more comfortable typing emotional things than they do talking about them. And so a lot will come out there. So that was one thing that I learned during the pandemic when I was teaching remotely, that there's some projects that really do work well remotely and others that don't. But yeah, it's, I teach, our school is something like 80% Latinx. Yeah.
I should say that Christina is a dedicated teacher. And in her exhibition at Riverside, there was adjacent to it an exhibition of work of
Yes.
several of your students.
Yeah.
That was really extraordinary.
Thank you.
And extraordinary both in the work that they had done, but also just so expressive of your spirit and your generosity to include them, to give them that chance to grow.
Yeah, there's no, I really feel like there's no point in doing what I do if it isn't to help women, especially, like, be able to enter into the art world with their work, right? It's just, I think it comes from maybe perhaps my parents' activism. I'm doing my own little bit of activism. Some of them don't need my help. Some of them are doing just fine without my help, but I like to help anyways.
Yes, one more question.
Christina, thank you so much for this. I am the daughter of someone who was incarcerated in the state in the war. And I'm learning more and more kind of about the relationships between Japanese families and Chicano families in terms of helping preserve property or, et cetera. But I'm wondering whether in Boyle Heights, I don't know how long your family stayed there, or maybe they're still there. But did a lot of, after the war, did many Japanese return to Boyle Heights?
It was my mother and father who grew up in Boyle Heights and had many Japanese friends. Some did, and some were destroyed from that. Their stores, their homes were taken from them. There was not compensation. Toyo Miyatake, right? He had a photographer's studio where he did portrait work. Yeah, his family relocated to San Gabriel, which is about 10 miles away from LA, and they still run their portrait studio, Miyatake. Yeah.
Thank you for explaining that story.
Yeah.
Very
You're welcome.
important. Yes?
Could you talk a little bit more about the idea of fiction in your work and how you fictionalize the stories? You talk about doing that in your project about garment industry.
Oh, yeah.
It's sort of like, have you done that in other projects, and where does that come from?
Yeah, actually, that's probably the first and only text that is sort of a made-up story. As I mentioned, I listened to the interviews over and over and over again and tried to absorb. But I also had been a poet. I did a lot of poetry. So I was pretty adept at waxing poetic and shortening things for emotional impact. So I think that's maybe something that informed that particular text.
Oh, one more question.
This is a closer, I guess, but I'm just wondering what it means to you to have your work at the National Gallery and wondering what the uses of it might be here.
Well, it's wonderful. Of course. I'm not sure how to answer that, except that it's like, it's great. I love it. I think there's been a movement to acquisition women and women of color's work in major institutions. I think that this probably is part of that. I'm honored. I think there's a lot more work to be done probably too. I've been working 30 years doing photography, and I think that if you'll notice, a lot of the work that's being collected right now is actually from, the 2000s, of mine anyways.
Except for Bend.
And so, the way that I feel about that is that, it's kind of been sitting on the shelf, like awaiting to be discovered. I hate that narrative, but it's kind of the truth, right? And it's still relevant. I feel like the work is still relevant. It doesn't feel old, I hope it doesn't anyways. Yeah, but totally thrilled, yeah.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. Thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, great.